Okay, well, good evening, everybody. Today is the 19th of November. My name is Chris Blandy. I'm talking to you right now from the beautiful island of Madeira. I'm actually here at home, so apologies if you do hear some kids screaming in the background. But it is 7 o'clock at night, and it's a real pleasure to be in front of you today and talking a little bit about Madeira, the island, the history, and of course getting into the family's wines. And I think we've got a great selection to be tasting through tonight. Thank you so much to Tony Carter at Vintage Port and Wine for setting this up. It's a real pleasure to have set this up with you, and thank you for sending out all the packs to all your clients as well. I am expecting this presentation to be a total of 45 minutes, obviously with the 7 wines that we have in front of us. So if you'd like to leave all your Q&A questions and answers to the end, I hopefully will be able to cover all bases, and then I'll try and follow up with some of the answers right at the end. So I'm currently a 7th generation looking after the family's business. So as you can see here in the logo, we actually established this in 1811. So we've been celebrating now nearly 210 years next year of making wine. But before we get into this, obviously, to understand Madeira today and to understand the wine today, we obviously need to delve a little bit back into history and really understand how this very small subtropical island of Africa became known as one of the best wine producers of the world during the eras of discoveries, all the way up actually to today. So just putting it into perspective, Madeira's location is ultimately what benefited it the most. As you can see here, the small dot closer to Morocco than it is to Portugal. It was discovered by the Portuguese in 1419. And ever since that year, served as almost a refueling post for all the ships, mostly Portuguese ships, who would pass by Madeira to pick up fresh water, vegetables, food, etc., to take them on their voyages down the western seaboard of Africa, around South Africa, up to India, down to Brazil, across the Caribbean, and then, of course, up the eastern seaboard of the United States of America. Now, this is all done in conjunction with the prevailing winds and, of course, with the currents. So Madeira was strategically a very important port of call. Now, the creation of Madeira is ultimately led by a legend. So the legend has it was that one particular captain was very interested in his wines, and Madeira wine at the time was being used as ballast in the hulls of the sailing ships. And this one captain took it upon himself to do an experiment. So he passed by Madeira, picked up, enough wine to act as ballast, to serve the crew, to serve his officers. He was on a trip round to India, and he decided to store a barrel in the hold of the ship, which nobody was allowed to touch. And on his way back to Madeira, he sat down with the producer, and one's assuming this must have been 4 or 5 or 6 years later. He sat down with the producer again, and both of them tasted the wine from the barrel. Was it the rocking motion of the wine in the barrel, or was it something else that actually improved the wine after this 5 or 6 year voyage? Now, of course, they quickly came to the conclusion that it was passing the equator twice on the way to India and twice on the way back that ultimately heated the wines to such high temperatures that water started evaporating off and concentrating and intensifying the flavors and the aromas of the wine. So, you might think, well, this is legend. It doesn't actually have any bearing to the truth. Completely opposite. We still have documents. We still have POs or purchase orders sent by our clients, normally either in the US or in the UK, asking us to specifically send wine to tropical locations, be it Jamaica, be it round to India again, before arriving finally to the end destination. And this is also to maximize the heat of the wines in the barrels, and therefore maximizing the price. So even up to the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, specific barrels of wines were sent around to different exotic tropical locations in order to maximize price. This is called the VERDELHO, right? And these were wines that really hit the top prices at market value. So a little bit of history, legend involved, but of course the legend is very much in line with the reality of what was done. And today, obviously, we don't send barrels of wines around the world. Unfortunately, we do everything here in Madeira, and I'll be explaining a little bit more about that as we go through. But before, let me touch a little bit about the island, because the island is absolutely critical to understand. It is a subtropical island. It is quite far south, and it is in the middle of the Atlantic. So probably not your classical growing location for high quality wines. As I've already mentioned, it's actually closer to Morocco, so it's only 310 miles off the coast of Morocco, and about 683 miles off the southwesternmost point of Portugal. And the island is of volcanic origin and erupted about 5 million years ago. Now, why is this important? Well, because the island itself is of volcanic origin, means that the soil type is a very specific soil type, which allows us to produce wines with the characteristics that we need in order to age them through a relatively aggressive heating process. Madeira itself is made up of 3 different islands, 3 different groups of islands. The main one there you can see right in the center of your screen, that is the island of Madeira. So it has about 250,000 inhabitants living on the island. And amazingly, this is where Ronaldo came from. So this small island, you can now place Ronaldo onto the map as well. On the north easternmost part of the screen, you have the island of Porto Santo, a much smaller island, only about 5,000 inhabitants living there year round. And it's a place where most of Madeira goes during the summer holidays because it's got an absolutely stunning sandy beach of about 9 miles, a really beautiful place to visit. And then down south of Madeira, you have the Deserter Islands, which are a naturally protected area. And again, those are beautiful to visit, either by boat, and you can actually walk around the island itself. So we spoke a little bit about the prevailing wind. The prevailing wind actually comes in from the northeasternmost part of Madeira. And the way the Madeira landscape is created, there's this big mountainous ridge running from east to west, which ultimately divides Madeira into 2 parts. You have the north part, which is obviously subject to the northeasterly winds coming down. So a lot more rainfall, a lot cooler temperatures, a lot more humidity on the north of the island. And then on the south, obviously protected by the mountains, you have a lot of different climate. So this is probably more your tropical climate here on the south, and especially the south west of the island, where less rainfall, longer sun hours as well. So it does make it fascinating to understand how these dynamics works in terms of the microclimate. And more often than not, these microclimates will create a very bizarre situation on the island, where you can be down in Funchal, which is the capital, on the south side, swimming in the sea, and it's 23 degrees. And up in the mountains, 20 minutes by car, you can be up in the snow. So it does have this variety in terms of microclimates, which obviously is great to know as you're living here, as you're visiting here, but also obviously when you were talking about wine in terms of agriculture, it's fascinating to know exactly why certain crops are planted where and what altitude they're planted at. The total area in Madeira is only 740 square kilometers. And the highest peak reaches up above 6,100 feet, or just above 1,800 meters above sea level. Now, we spoke a little bit about the volcanic aspects. So the soils here are clay-based, very rich and diverse soils. So everything can grow on the island, very much dependent on the altitude and the location. It's very high in iron, manganese, and magnesium, and this translates into very high acidic fruit that we have here. So any type of fruit that you try on the island, be it passion fruit, banana, you always have this underlying acidic base. which actually gives you a real amount of freshness to the fruit that we have. But really importantly, when it comes to winemaking, the acidity is probably the sole main component that we need in order to create the stability in the wine as we're losing quite a lot of volume through water evaporation. Then on the right-hand side, you do have, of course, natural resources. Madeira being a subtropical island, about 70% of the island is covered by UNESCO protected rainforest. And of course, this rainforest is fed by these beautiful springs, water springs, all around the island, the majority of which are going to be on the north. That, of course, then translates directly into these levada systems, these irrigation channels, which Madeira has become famous for, especially for the walking aspect. There are about 1,500, 2,000 miles of this levada system around the island, distributing water from the rich water sources to the slightly poorer water sources on the south side, making sure the agriculture can have access to water. Now, before we get into the wines, what I love doing is actually sharing a little bit the images of Madeira, because not only is it a beautiful place to come and visit, but more importantly, I think it gives you a real sense of how these different components really kind of concentrate into the wine that we're producing. So I hope you can get a feel for that as we go through these slides. This particular slide is taken from the third highest mountain called Pico Arieiro, and this is actually looking westwards towards the sunset. So you can see we're on top of the ridge, which runs from east to west. And the highest mountain is actually on the right-hand side, just covered there by one of the peaks in the foreground. In the background, you can see the plateau called Paul de Serra. So a great walking destination, and it's this mountainous ridge running down from east to west that's going to separate your different microclimates, your north and your south. This here is a beautiful fishing village of SERCIAL. You can really get a feeling and an understanding of the volcanic influence on the island. So, and as you can see in the foreground on the picture on the left-hand side, you do have black beaches on the island of Madeira. You only have two sandy beaches, golden sandy beaches, and this was sand specifically brought in from mainland Portugal and also from Africa. But the real sand from Madeira are either the pebble beaches or the black sand. And this is SERCIAL. You can actually go swimming in the black sandy beach there on the left-hand side. But what I like especially about this image is not only the Lowry Silver Forest, which is a protected forest, which I spoke about, going up into the mountains and down into the ravine, but also two of the wines that we're going to be tasting today. The majority of the varietals of the grapes for these two wines are actually sourced in this region, and they are SERCIAL and VERDELHO. This is the irrigation channel I was telling you about. So, I mean, this is a real beautiful image on the north of the island. You can walk along for many hours on these irrigation channels. You get a real sense for agriculture and for the Lowry Silver Forest. Everywhere you go on the island, you have beautiful images, and viewpoints are everywhere. So everybody has a fantastic view. This is a particular view from São Jorge on the north of the island. So this is where the majority of MALMSEY is grown on the island. And this is looking westwards from the north. So you can see the Arco de São Jorge on the left-hand side there, the fishing village. And then right there at the end, the headland of Porto Muniz. As a comparison, this is the south. This is the Ponta do Sol. Again, different microclimate here. You do have the stone beaches there and a very big concentration of banana plantation, which is probably the second most import and export when it comes to Madeira crops. It's wine and banana is shortly behind. And then, of course, this is where I live. So this is the capital city, Funchal. You can see the Serra in the foreground, which is the cathedral. The wine lodge that I'll be telling you about a little bit later is on the left-hand side, quite close to the sea, and you'll get a feeling for that as you go through it. And I'm actually located, I don't know if you can see halfway up the image on the right-hand side, this big bridge. I am just below there. So it is, we're very lucky to live in such beautiful island. And then, of course, finally, this is the image looking at sunset again, looking westwards over the harbour of Funchal. Now, talking a little bit about the vineyards, you know, we always say tongue-in-cheek, the perfect place for vineyards, because, you know, it is quite far south, it is quite close to Africa. We do have a subtropical climate, so not your normal growing conditions for some of the top wines of the world, but Madeira somehow manages to find the right components in order to make some great wines. The viticulture scene here, just bear in mind, it is micro viticulture. Francisco Albuquerque, our winemaker, talks of the vineyard situation here and our vineyard growers as garden growers. So, you know, these are people who have been inheriting land for generations. Very, very small average land holding per grower. So the total area, we're only talking about 1,235 acres of vines, split between about 1,500 registered growers. Okay, so we are talking about micro viticulture. Just to give you an idea, this harvest we worked with about 600 individual growers from all around the island. Some of them come up to the winery in their pickup truck with about 10 cases of grapes, but you know, those growers are as important as some of the big growers on the island. So it makes for quite a complex complex vintage here on the island, but it is great fun because we do try and go back to the traditional way of receiving grapes. We do a lot of grape trading as well, so a really good time to come and visit us at the beginning of September. The traditional growing system of the vineyards is through the pergola, or what we call the latada system. This is where the vines are grown overhead in order to maximize aeration from below the vines. But a lot of the newer plantations are actually going through the espaldeira or the espalier method. And those are only possible if they're going to be in your perfect windswept locations, because one of the big issues here that we have in terms of vineyards is humidity and weed growth. So the higher up you can get the grapes off the ground, the better it is for it. And if you're going to do a espalier, then make sure that you are in a windswept location, either by the sea or on a sea cliff. That way you'll reduce all humidity-related illnesses as well. So this is a pergola system. You know, a lot of people come to Madeira and they question, you know, I didn't see any vineyards, but they're all covered up in these carpeted cultivation scenes around the island. This here is a particular picture taken on the south of the island in the Estreito de Câmara, so we're talking about 400, 500 meters above sea level. And as you can see, the carpet is almost overtaking some of the houses. And a lot of them are being split up and fragmented into smaller vineyards. So it does give you a very good example of the vineyard growth here on the island. And this is, you know, this is a typical scene during harvest time. So rather than bending down, picking grapes from the normal espalier method, here you're actually, if you're lucky enough, if you're short enough, you'll be picking grapes up above head height, which actually makes it a lot more comfortable. Then, of course, you know, this is what I was trying to explain when, you know, the best locations for espalier are going to be on the sea cliffs. This here is a beautiful vineyard above Porto Muniz, owned by a very dynamic young grape grower. Here he's actually got about 7 hectares of Verdelho. And as you can see, the pristine conditions right across the sea cliffs. It's probably, in my opinion, at least one of the most spectacular vineyards in Portugal, if not in Europe. So the viticulture scene is complex, it's challenging, there's a big risk as a lot of the younger generation want to move away from the high intensity, complete manual labor that is the viticulture. So we've actually started investing a lot more into the viticulture. We have 2 vineyards now split between 2 quintas that we manage. One is my cousin's quinta on the left-hand side, Santa Luzia. So that's here in Funchal, actually right next to where I am. And then the other quinta is Quinta do Bispo on the north in São Jorge, where we have, well, we're going to be having about 100% MALMSEY planted at that location. So this is something which I believe we're going to be investing more and more in over time in order to protect enough quantity when it comes to our harvest time. Now, when we talk about Madeira wine, I always say the secret with Madeira is behind the aging. And most of the wines that we're having today are actually aged in what we call the BLANDY'S wine lodge, or the ADEGAS in Portuguese. And as you can see from this picture, very close to the Port of Funchal. You know, historically very useful as well, because all wine was sent off in pipes. This here has come up again. This is actually the original. This is a photograph of the original deed that was signed by the first Blandy to arrive at the island in 1811. This deed was signed in 1838, buying the property that we still have today. That used to actually house 100% of the Blandy's wine company. Over time, we've slowly reduced that as efficiency came and we started to get bigger. But nowadays, 650,000 liters of our most premium Blandy's Madeira wine, 5 of which you'll be tasting here, are all aged in this one building. A very old building, originally built at the end of the 16th century. This particular building has 12 different aging rooms. So we have 650,000 liters divided in 12 different aging rooms. And each aging room is going to have its own microclimate in there. And this was all naturally heated. So the one you can see there in the foreground with the barrel showing, that is the Sotão de Amêndoa. And it's up here where we're going to be losing around 15% of volume through water evaporation every year. So this is ultimately to replicate, the sea voyages, crossing the equator, crossing the tropics. 15% water evaporation is happening in this one room every year. The wines are up there for a period of 5 to 6 years before slowly being taken down to the lower cooler floors, where the evaporation rate is obviously a lot less. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in business. Ultimately, trying to create what we now name the Blandy's house style is very much created by this particular wine lodge in the center of Funchal. And here it is. This is the Sotão de Amêndoa. This is where we're losing 15% of water evaporation every year. You come here in the summer, you can get a real sense of that smell, the kind of very old Madeira aging smell. And it's almost integrated into the wood as well. So it makes for a really, really pleasant experience to come and see. So of course, if you're losing that much water through water evaporation, you're going to go from a light gold wine at harvest time down to the deep brown for some of the rich, older Madeiras. So I've been talking for a little bit too long. So I'm sure you'll be happy to know that we're going to get into the first wine. And the first wine we're trying is a slightly different one, but I really wanted to use this slide and get to this slide in order to talk about this first wine, because we don't sell this wine. It was a great idea from Tony to come up with this example, because what it allows us to do, it actually allows us to show you the change, the alteration as a result of the heating, especially in the Blandy's wine lodge. So we are now trying a SERCIAL 2020 fortified Madeira. This is what I call a raw Madeira. So when I mean raw Madeira, this is a fortified Madeira, but it doesn't have any age on it at all. Obviously, we're in November, and this was harvested at the end of September, so it's just been fortified. And as you can see, it is the light gold color you can see on the left of the slide. Okay, so it's interesting. I have to say a lot of people have tried this for the first time and have really enjoyed it. They ask us whether or not we're legally allowed to commercialize it. Unfortunately, we're not. But I'm sure, if there's enough public support, that we might be able to change the law. But before we get into actually tasting it, I just want to show you the glassware that I normally use when it comes to tasting Madeiras. No, let's not get too complicated. I have normal white wine glass. It's actually slightly bigger than a normal white wine glass, but a white wine glass serves absolutely perfectly. I also do have a real champagne glass, which I also do like to use. But more often than not, a port glass works extremely well for all Madeiras. But if you really want to go to the next level and you have some very old vintage Madeiras at home, then go for the super aquavit. Unfortunately, I don't have any here. I've got some at the wine lodge. You go for the super aquavit glass, and that's going to really take the experience up to the next level. But this is the best glass if you have it to use, or the white wine glass, so feel free. And as you can see, if you've got this SERCIAL raw in front of you, the wine itself is not what you would expect from a Madeira, of course. It doesn't have any Madeira aging to it. I get this lovely apple nose and slight honey. And also some very kind of light whiskey notes to it as well. So it is fascinating to show how this is then going to translate into our 10-year-old SERCIAL. So if I was you, I'll try and keep a little bit of that back later and taste it as we're going through tasting the 10-year-old SERCIAL as well. And as we're going to go through this, you know, everybody's going to have their own experience with the wines. There's no clear aroma or flavor tasting notes for a lot of these wines. Even when you get some of the top master sommeliers, the master of wines, you know, some of the top journalists trying the same wine, a lot of them will come out with different tasting notes. So it's almost if you're tasting two different wines. It's very much to do with our own personal experience. Not a lot of us are drinking Madeira wine on a regular basis. So this aroma wheel here is quite interesting because this is at the end of a scientific research project that we did, trying to identify what are the core Madeira wine aromas and flavors found as you go through the different varietals. So this is quite interesting to have as you go through the wines. You know, please come back and visit it. So the first one we're going to be tasting, with the exception of the raw, is the Tinta Negra. And the wine that we've chosen is the Duke of Sussex. Before we get into the wine, a little bit about Tinta Negra. So as you can see from the picture, it is a red grape. Even though the wine in the glass, it might not seem like it's coming from a red grape, but it is a red grape. And this is actually probably the most important grape that we have on the island. There are about 588 acres of Tinta Negra planted, the majority on the south and the north of the island. South in the Câmara de Lobos, with the estate de Câmara Lobos, and on the north in the region of São Vicente. I say it's the most important grape because it represents about 80% of all grapes grown on the island right now. And historically, a lot of people would have associated, you know, all the quality Madeira to SERCIAL, VERDELHO, BUAL, MALMSEY, and QUINTAS. You know, and it was probably our fault. You know, for many years during the 20th century, a lot of Tinta Negra produced was actually produced for cooking. You know, and we have to think about how did Tinta Negra come onto the market. Well, first it came on at the end of the 19th century. So we got hit by Oidium on the island in 1852. Phylloxera followed in 1872. So all the classical white varietals were obviously under a huge amount of pressure. We weren't at that time buying enough white varietals in order just to satisfy a very, very popular drink at the time. Tinta Negra came in. They say originally it was from the south of Spain in Andalusia, and then taken down to the Canaries, and then from the Canaries it came up to Madeira. So it was brought in because of its adaptability to the island, and the fact that it was high yielding as well. So it became known as a very, very good alternative to classical white varietals that was struggling to come back in great quantities as the market was demanding. Beginning of the 20th century came, and then of course, you know, we got hit with four major global events. We had the Russian Revolution, we had the First World War, we had the Spanish flu, and then of course we had Prohibition. So for an island as small as Madeira, with so much market dependency at the time on European, the Russian, and the US markets, we really, really struggled, and we never actually came out of it. For many years after the 1920s, a lot of people started closing shop. BLANDY'S, we joined an association that was created in the beginning of the 20th century called the Madeira Wine Association. We joined that in 1925 together with the Leacock family. So this was a time when everybody was joining forces to try and minimize the negative marketplace. And over time, you know, we went up buying shareholdings of these smaller family producers. The Cossack Gordon brand, a very well-known brand in the UK, joined the Madeira Wine Association in 1958. And then over time, we've been buying up, and nowadays we are very much, you know, we are the major shareholders of the Madeira Wine Company, and 10% of the company is owned actually by the Symington family from Portugal. So Tinta Negra during this time was very much associated with cooking Madeira. We weren't allowed to put Tinta Negra on the label. We weren't allowed to even bottle up vintage Madeira using Tinta Negra. So we were shooting ourselves in the foot. Legislation changed in 2015, and now finally Tinta Negra is gaining the recognition that it deserves. And I hope we can actually show that here in this Duke of Sussex. You know, Madeira wine develops and evolves with age in barrel. This wine that we're drinking now, the Duke of Sussex, is the only wine, or the only category, so the 3-year-old Dukes, Duke of Sussex, Duke of Cumberland, Duke of Cambridge, and very well known in the UK, the Duke of Clarence, they're all aged in the estufaging process. And this is where we control the aging. In stainless steel, temperature controlled tanks, we heat the wine for about 4 months at 45 degrees centigrade, accelerating the aging process of Madeira wine, placing the wine then after the 4 months into large Brazilian saddlewood vats, and then finally bottling it up, excuse me, as a 3-year-old Madeira. And this is the drier style we have. So Duke of Sussex is going to be the drier style we have. And as you can see here, it is still quite pale. It's only had 3 years of aging, but it's already starting to evolve in terms of the aroma profile. You're already starting to get that Madeira bouquet of nuttiness and spiciness. It does have a little bit of almost baked apple there at the back, but I think baked apple together with spicy. And then this is what you're going to get with all of our wines. You're going to get this lovely acidity, really finding the balance with the sugars there, giving great freshness, great length. And you know, for a 3-year-old, it's a really accessible wine, lovely to have chilled with some almonds before a meal. You know, lovely to have with some cheese. So it's a real versatile wine, really, really interesting. You know, even a Tinta Negra Gape, it's amazing what it can do as a 3-year-old. Imagine what it can do as a 5 or 10 and a vintage Madeira. So, as I said, you know, Tinta Negra has been underappreciated for many years. Time has changed now to give it as much appreciation as possible. For all of you who liked the technical aspects, each one of the wines we're going to be tasting through does have a technical sheet to it. Key things here to recognize, it's 19% alcohol. Residual sugar, quite high for a dry Madeira, 50 grams per litre. But you don't get that because of that acidity, nice 6 grams per litre acidity here, giving it real balance and real freshness. Now, moving on now into your classical white varietals. Just remember here, whereas Tinta Negra can represent any one of the 4 styles of Madeira, so we do have a dry, medium rich, and a rich Tinta Negra, all made with the same varietals. When it comes to these white varietals, it's all about stylistic preference for each one of the varietals, and this is actually set down by law in the legislation that governs the Madeira wine sector. The SERCIAL on your left-hand side is always going to produce the drier style of Madeira, so around 50 grams per litre of residual sugar. Verdelho is always going to produce a medium dry style of Madeira, so around 70 grams per litre. The BUAL, a medium rich Madeira, again, around 90 grams per litre. And then MALMSEY, the richest style of Madeira. And here we can go from about 105 grams per litre up to as high as you want. QUINTAS, very rare grape, hardly found on the market anymore. If you do find some, pick it up because there's not so much currently aging. That actually fits in between the Verdelho and the BUAL. So here the winemaker does have the opportunity to produce slightly drier style of QUINTAS, more towards the Verdelho, or a slightly richer style of QUINTAS, more towards a BUAL. So wine number 3, we do have a 10-year-old Madeira. So just reiterating, all these wines I'm going to be drinking from now are all aged in the Blandy's Wine Lodge in Funchal. The Duke of Sussex is aged at our winery in Kinsale. So this is all in the Centennial method. Centennial method is where we let nature do the aging for us. We don't have any control over temperature or humidity. SERCIAL itself, so about 61 acres, very, very small, split between about 122 growers. It's quite interesting. The SERCIAL is the complete polar opposites about where it's grown. On the south side, it's actually grown about 700 meters above sea level at Chirudin-de-Serre. And on the north side, I already showed you the area of SERCIAL. Port-Munich is actually the region where SERCIAL is. And it can be actually down at sea level and can go up to about 300 meters above sea level. So when people do try SERCIAL for the first time, and one of the first things they say is saltiness. You know, there is a tendency to associate saltiness to SERCIAL. This is probably because, you know, a lot of the SERCIAL we're buying is from the north coast. And for any of you who have visited the north coast, it is constantly being battered by, you know, big northerly seas. And so the vineyards being in such close proximity to the seas, one could argue that salinity might come from the seas. But again, a real difference in terms of tonality from the raw that we had from 2020. You can already see there more of the kind of dark amber color to it. You almost have a white wine here, and then of course the SERCIAL here on the left-hand side. This is what 10 years of aging does in American oak barrels. Okay, so we've lost a lot of volume already in this particular glass. The average age of wine in this glass is 10 years old. And when we talk about average, it is the mathematical average, because the secret with Madeira wine blends is all about consistency. And so the winemaker's actually broken that down into a mathematical equation so that after every bottling, he can maintain consistency, using 12-year-old wines to give it a little bit more complexity, and 8-year-old wines to give it that kind of power and energy that young wines bring. So here on the nose, first up, it is quite discreet on the nose. And you'll see this as you're going through the remaining wines. It's quite discreet because the amount of residual sugar in here, in this particular wine, I'm talking about 48 grams per liter residual sugar. We've found, again, going back to scientific research, we found that the Madeira bouquet is pretty much caused by the natural sugars in the wine reacting with the heat. So, of course, being less sweet, as opposed to a MALMSEY, the evolution and the Madeira bouquet is going to take longer to hit the levels of the MALMSEY. So it is quite discreet, but I find it actually fascinating. Not a lot of people are going to expect this out of Madeira, but I love the nuttiness to it. It's got the nuttiness, the saltiness, the hint of aged brandy on this as well. You know, it really kind of, if I was a first-time Madeira drinker, this is not what I'd be expecting. But it is probably one of the most food-friendly wines that we have in the setup. You know, and a lot of the success with Madeira wine over the years has been its ability to pair up with a whole range of different foods. And I'll be talking about that quite often throughout the next few wines, because the entree, the restaurants, the bars, the cafes, you know, the sommeliers, they've all grabbed hold of Madeira because of its versatility in food pairing. And that's something that's really allowed the consumer to open their eyes and think, wow, this isn't just an after dinner drink. This isn't just a drink at Christmas time. This is a drink for any time of the meal. This is a drink for any time of the year. So we're really, really excited about that. And SERCIAL, I think, definitely leads the way in opening people's mind in terms of the potential that this has. You know, people always ask me, what is my #1 food pairing with SERCIAL? And I always have to say, the best time I had was with a French importer who came out to Madeira a few years ago. And he brought with him this pack, which he wouldn't let me have a look at until he was down in my cellar. And he asked me to take out the 10-year-old SERCIAL, which I always have in my fridge. I take it out, pour 3 glasses for him, his wife, myself, and he opens up this pack with this beautiful 18-month aged Comté cheese. that saltiness, dryness of the aged Comté just went perfectly with this 10-year-old SERCIAL, chilled as well. But you can definitely see there, you know, oysters, sushi. You can really start to, you know, push the envelope out in terms of, you know, how successful this wine is when it comes to pairing. Getting on now onto wine number 4, we have the 10-year-old Verdelho. Verdelho is the most widely planted of the white varietals. So we're talking about 143 acres here of the Verdelho. There's a lot of new plantings of the Verdelho opening up now, you know, purely because a lot of producers, including ourselves, we've started producing a lot more table wine made out of not only Verdelho but also Tinta Negra. And actually, you'll find there in the UK market, if you do look for it, our Atlantis Rosé, which is made with Tinta Negra, so really representing what is Tinta Negra on a volcanic island. And we also do a Verdelho Atlantis. We're still not exporting that. We still do too small a quantity that's only consumed here on the island. This is one of the reasons why it is the largest of the white varietals. It is one of those varietals that isn't region specific as much as BUAL or MALMSEY, so it can be grown in different locations. Chipolzada on the southwest, at about 500 meters above sea level. This is where we find some of the, you know, the best Verdelho, which we use for our table wines. On the north, we have vineyards in Port Manige, that vineyard which I showed you, remember, with that fantastic view of the north coast. They produce some of the top Verdelhos that we use for vintage Madeiras, as they do also in SERCIAL and Punta Delgada. So we are quite fortunate enough to have various different regions because we don't normally have a bad Verdelho vintage. You know, more often than not, we might have a bad vintage in SERCIAL, but a great vintage in Chipolzada, or vice versa. So this is a good thing about the different microclimates and the different plantations of the vineyards around the island. So the wine itself, again, sticking with the 10-year-old range, this is a medium dry. So here we've gone up a little bit in terms of residual sugar level, about 73 grams per liter. Serving temperature as well here, you know, we actually put a serving recommendation on the back of the label, about 13 degrees centigrade. It does have more weight on the nose, so you're beginning to get more of those kind of Madeira bouquet aromas coming through. You know, I love the description here by the International Wine and Spirit Competition. The vibrant acidity, the mahogany, bureau, and hazelnut notes. You know, and of course that acidity on the nose, the acidity on the palate as well. A little bit more residual sugar in there. Even more important, that residual sugar, the total acidity to balance out that sugar. And more mouthfeel as you get that sugar working. It's coating your palate more. Again, that acidity gives it almost a tangerine finish. But you know, not a fresh tangerine, almost like a baked tangerine, you know, marmalade-ish. It's really tight, really easy wine to pair up with foods as well. Again, if you want something simple, go for the hard cheeses, aged hard cheeses. Soups work extremely well with this. Or if you're like me and you love roast chicken, that is a match made in heaven. I think it is one of the best food pairings that I've ever done, Verdelho with roast chicken. Try it out if you do have that at home, because you'll be really surprised. So getting now onto the BUAL, I have to say, as a consumer of Madeira wine, I do tend to lean quite a lot to the BUAL varietal. For me, it ticks a lot of boxes in terms of what I want as a consumer. It's almost like choosing your best, you know, who's your favorite child, so it makes it quite a difficult conversation. But I think BUAL is medium rich, the sugar level is right for me. The age of BUAL, the older it gets, the spicier it gets, and the smokier it gets, so it makes for a fascinating wine. And again, an extremely friendly food pairing wine. This is very region specific, you know, and this is actually the varietal that we probably have the most concern of in terms of future production. There's a lot of real estate going on right now in that region of Madeira, and actually, it was already started pre-COVID. Actually, during COVID, a lot of people are coming to Madeira and looking for places to invest. So the agricultural scene is under a lot of pressure to try and protect it for the next generation coming through. The average age of grower is around 60, 65. 100% manual labor, as already mentioned. Everything's in stone terracing, so it does make it very challenging to find the future for BUAL in this specific region, but we are working on it, and hopefully we'll secure it for the future. BUAL, again, we've gone up a little bit in terms of tonality, so slightly richer here. We've gone up to just around 100, just underneath 100 grams per litre of residual sugar. You get here on that nose that beautiful fig notes, maple syrup. Love the International Wine and Spirit Competition commentary, the sugared almonds, or sugared walnuts, sorry. But I love the tropical fruit notes of this. And when I mean tropical fruit notes, I mean, walking down by the sea, surrounded by passion fruit trees, by banana trees, by papaya trees, the kind of the blend with the maritime influence and the rich fruit of the trees. I get that a lot on this. And we spices. All Madeiras have an aromatic compound called sotalon, and that sotalon is ultimately what you find in curries as well. So as a trick, what I do in some of my consumer events, the older the BUAL has, the better it's shown. I actually ask people to rub a little bit on their hand, and the heat reacting with the wine will actually let this sotalon or this curry flavors, curry aromas off, and it really kind of highlights how much sotalon wines have, and especially the BUAL. Again, definitely a step up in terms of sugar level when compared to the Verdelho. Again, more mouth-filling, really does coat your tongue. That acidity, though, again, very, very prominent, slightly higher than the Verdelho and the SERCIAL. In terms of food pairing notes with this, if you like pâtés, if you like foie gras, if you like blue cheeses, if you like fruit cakes, creme brulees, it works extremely well. So feel free, give it a go, put some of your tasting notes onto the YouTube page. It'd be great to know what's worked with you and what hasn't worked with you. And now our penultimate wine is the 10-year-old MALMSEY. This, I think, is probably what people in the UK think of Madeira. This is the richer style of Madeira is very much overall what the sector sells most of. So I think people's perception of Madeira is very much a richer style. But I think it's, again, the most encompassing wine, just because pound for pound, within the same age group, Madeira wine is going to give you a greater aroma profile. It's going to give you the greater Madeira bouquet. You have a lot more residual sugar here reacting with the heat, creating this Madeira bouquet. So it's definitely more. It's definitely more forward on the nose, which I think is fascinating. It is very region specific. So here we are talking predominantly in the region of São Jorge, on the north of the island. And this is where we have our vineyard, as I showed you at the beginning, the Quinta do Bispo, where we're also planting MALMSEY. And the wine itself, as I mentioned, a lot of figs here, more the kind of the molasses coming through, the marmalade, the orange peel, almost a lovely note of kind of soft notes of aged rum on there as well. You get a real sense that what you're going to be drinking is something that's going to be quite sweet. You don't know how sweet it's going to be, but you definitely get a sense that you're going to go into something that's going to be quite rich. But as soon as it hits your mouth, you get that first initial boost of sugar coating your mouth, and then straight after that, the sense of poise and tension, which I love what Robert Park has written, that counterbalances the rich and the sugar levels. This is the secret of Madeira wine. It's really highlighted in all of these wines that we've tasted now, but especially with this wine, when we're talking sugar levels, about 123 grams, but that acidity as well, just giving pure poise and freshness. Really enjoyable, especially now coming into the cooler months of the year and up to Christmas. But again, this is a wine to be had at any time of the year. I love this wine as an after dinner drink, but I've also had some beautiful New York strip steak, grilled steak, with some chips and some caramelized onions with this. I really blew people's mind away with this. Can have it with some cheeses, some tarte tatin as well. So super food friendly. Got a little bit of sugar in there, so you don't want to necessarily blend sweetness with sweetness too much, but look for that something which needs a little bit of sweetness tied onto it. So really mouth-filling, quite difficult to talk after that, but it is a fantastic wine to have. And then we're staying with the MALMSEY, and now getting into the single harvest MALMSEY. Apologies, word harvest is badly spelt. So single harvest MALMSEY. This is what I call a baby vintage. So a colheita, as we're also known in Portuguese, is a wine that's basically part of the vintage aging program. So vintage Madeira has to be at least 20 years in barrel. There's no limit to it. So we have some vintage Madeiras that are 100 years old, still aging, but it has to be at least 20 years old. So colheitas are wines that are part of the vintage aging program that we've actually just bottled before becoming full-blown vintages. So this particular wine was bottled in 2019. So this is a wine with 15 years of age. And when it comes to buying colheita Madeiras or vintage Madeiras, there are two bits of information which are absolutely critical in order to understand and to control your expectation levels. Firstly, obviously the year of the harvest, very important. But secondly, it's the year that it was bottled in, because all the aging of Madeira is done by us in the wine lodge. As soon as we bottle the wine is going to be ready to be consumed. It does not need any bottle age at all to it. Okay, so that's quite important. When we release a wine onto the market, it will not need any bottle age at all to it. So, so I think it's a fantastic wine that to buy, especially an old wine that you can consume whenever you want. Another great thing about Madeira as well, which I haven't mentioned, is its indestructibility. Jancis Robinson does name it as the perfect desert islet drink, because it is a wine that you can actually put a cork back in. This is probably three quarters full. Put the cork back in. I can hide this in my cellar, and we could be coming back to the same YouTube in about 2, 3, 5, 10 years time. We could try this wine again, and the wine will be exactly the same. So the whole process has gone through a pretty aggressive heating process. So there's been a lot of air contact. The wine is pretty much oxidized. So if stored in the right conditions, or standing upright with the cork in, away from direct sunlight, not a lot of heat or temperature oscillation, the wine will last for a very long time, which of course we don't want you to do. We want you to enjoy it as quickly as you can, share it around with friends, because I think that's what wine is all about. This particular wine, so whilst the other wines were blends, so this is a blend of older and younger wines to try and find that perfect unison of complexity with acidity and youthfulness. What we have here is a very single-focused Madeira, so this is from a single year. As already mentioned, it is a 15-year-old wine, so it is beginning to get some good depth and complexity and intensity to it. And you can already get a sense on the nose when you compare up with the 10-year-old MALMSEY. We are definitely taking a step up in terms of the Madeira bouquet. I definitely get a lot more layers. It's a lot more complex, this wine. So this is a wine which, some of you first-time Madeira wine drinkers might not be able to get first time. Keep on coming back to it, after 5 minutes, after an hour, come back to it tomorrow and see what else you can actually note down in some of your tasting notes, because this wine is constantly developing. And and you might not get it the first time, you'll definitely get it the second time. But it is very similar in terms of the base aromas. So we are definitely getting a lot of that kind of raisin, fig notes, marmalade as well. The crystallized fruit, I think, is a great description for this. And then, of course, the lovely aged old brandy notes that we have beginning to develop themselves. And the older this wine will get in barrel, the more developed those aged brandy notes are going to become. On the palate, again, the higher strung acidity, that tension to it. It's got a little bit less residual sugar, so the acidity plays more of an important role here. But there's a lot of tension to it. Again, mouth-filling sugar, but then just great length, and you've got the taste buds constantly working. It's a really beautifully made wine, this. I have to say, when this came on to the family's tasting panel, back in early 2019, everybody was just blown away by this wine. So it's been really well received. But unfortunately, when it comes to Madeira wine, as we're losing so much water evaporation throughout the whole process, we are talking very small quantities. Of this particular wine, as you can see there on the bottom right, when we launched it with about 2,600. So even as COVID has come around, we've already gone through half of our stock. So we always do try and have the 4 white varietals as a creator on the market at any one time. So if you would like to try the SERCIAL, BUAL and the VERDELHO creators, as well as retrying the 2004, then I'm sure Tony will be able to help you. Otherwise, drop us a line, and I'm sure we'll be able to get Tony to sort you out. And just to finish off, it wouldn't be a tasting without quickly talking about these 2 fantastic wines, which were launched, a special COVID collection. I think, we'll look back on this year and we'll think, wow, what we had to go through. But 76 Verdelho and a fantastic Centennial 1920 has just come onto the market. So they were launched virtually as well, unfortunately, in September this year. So do look out to them if you do want to take another step up when it comes to Madeira wines. So thank you so much.